In 2015, August 4th of 2015, I received the news that I have terminal breast cancer. And they gave me 6 months to 2 years. But my doctors never asked me if I wanted to live. They just assume everybody does. After the shock wore off, I was actually kind of excited. Whenever it's my time, it's my time. I'm comfortable with that. But here I am. I'm still here. So I obviously serve some purpose.
Maybe I should just take me back to myself. I've told you, I've tried to be honest with you, and when I'm honest, it just does nothing but come back and bite me in the ass.
I was kind of unsure about talking about it again, but if it helps another person not get trapped in a situation like mine, then it's for the right reasons. Single women who have children need to be very cautious. There are too many things I should have seen. If something feels wrong in your gut, you have to listen to it. But I didn't know Scott Kimball is evil. I'm very certain he had a plan all along. Casey's father and I divorced when she was very young and had not really dated much at all after my second divorce. I met Scott Kimball at a casino in Blackhawk, Colorado. His mother was wheelchair-bound. He moved around the furniture for her so she could sit with us and play. And I think all women look at men who are kind to their mother, and they think that they might make a good partner. So we chatted for a while.
I'm Scott.
Lori.
Hi.
Hi.
He had a very nice smile.
You better watch out for her. She's a shark.
He seemed pretty amazing. He told me that he had 2 young sons. He only had them part-time. And I really thought I would never date somebody that had small children. But he was so appealing. So I wrote my number down on a piece of paper, and I slid my number to him. And I kept my fingers on top of the piece of paper. And I said, "You're not a felon or anything, are you?" He told me he worked for the FBI, and he couldn't be a felon and work for the FBI. And then I thought, if the FBI trusts him, why would I not trust him?
Well, I actually have to head out, but you've got my number. Bye.
Night.
We got relatively close fast. Allowing somebody else to take me out and pay for meals and things like that, it felt good. But when we started staying together at my house, he would take off in the middle of the night.
What's going on?
It was always because he had to work, and if he leaves in the middle of the night, I'm not allowed to know where he's going.
Sorry, Lori, I told you about this. It's my job.
You mentioned you had to work late sometimes. But where are you going?
He told me he works undercover, he can't tell me anything, it's for my own safety. He was like nailing Jell-O to a wall.
I can't say, but it is important.
Just explain it to me.
He broke his own rule, and he told me about a case that he was working on.
All right. I am working on a case of a woman named Jennifer that I believe was murdered.
A girl named Jennifer had been killed by drug dealers. That was all the information he let me have.
So I know it's hard, but it's best if I don't tell you where I'm going. it's safer for us. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
It bothered me that I didn't know everything, but he assured me it was for my own safety, and I dropped it. I never discussed it with him again.
Come on in.
The first time I went to his house, I could tell it had been decorated by a woman.
This is the place.
There were angels, lots of angel pictures, angels on the hearth.
Let me go get a bottle of wine.
Certainly not furniture that a man with 2 children would buy. I said, are you dating somebody? Should I be afraid of another woman? You know, should I even be here?
Did you decorate this, or do you have a wife you're not telling me about?
I haven't been here very long. It's my friend Jennifer's place. I'm just leasing it from her since she moved.
I said, is it the same girl that you think is dead?
Oh, no, just the same first name. I'm sorry.
He said, see, I have a lease that we wrote up. I am leasing her furniture.
I have a copy of the lease agreement right here.
It did seem odd that he would offer an explanation pretty much before I even asked the question. But there were no other signs of a woman. There were not bathroom products, makeup. There was nothing like that that would lead me to believe that another woman was living there.
Come on, let me show you the rest of the place.
We dropped the topic. I just learned not to question. Scott told me that he found a farmhouse for all of us to live in. My daughter Casey met his sons, and they all seemed to get along very well. It was just the perfect environment for everybody.
Well, I'm just about to head to the grocery store here in a second.
But one day, Scott had gone on a business trip, and he called me and asked me to use his vehicle while he was gone.
Why?
Mine was actually nicer, but he said just drive it, you know, day in, day out, whatever, while he was away. I don't know why he asked me to do it, but it wasn't worth talking about it. He just wanted me to do it. I did it.
I don't know what the big deal is, but if it's that important to you, sure.
And then he said, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I forgot to make a deposit. There's a $5,000 check. Can you please just drop that at my bank? I completely forgot.
Okay, sure, I can take it on the way to get groceries. Okay, love you too. Bye.
To have $5,000 missing that you plumb forgot to deposit seemed odd to me. And what I noticed in the memo of the check was it said for Jennifer. It felt strange that, again, we've got an incident with a Jennifer. But I definitely thought that the check was something having to do with an FBI case. So I thought it's just one more thing I probably shouldn't know anything about. We got to the car, and within, it felt like seconds, there were police cars on us. One night, we had been in Black Hawk gambling, and we got to the car, and within, it felt like seconds, there were police cars on us.
What's happening?
There's nothing wrong. This is just part of the job. You know this. Listen, it's fine.
And I was just in a state of confusion. I asked Scott what's going on. He says, Lori, you know what I do for a living. This is all just part of it. He would always tell me he works undercover. He can't tell me anything. It's for my own safety. I did know that he had spent time in prison undercover for some drug ring.
Certain things I can't tell you about, okay?
So it was almost like a feeling I should just move along and stop asking questions. You know, it's not that big of a deal, just move along.
I'll be out in no time. Just take your car back to the house, and I'll let you know once I get out, okay?
Okay.
But I really didn't know what to think. I wouldn't have known the right questions to ask him anyway. So I had 3 or 4 days to wonder, and the next day he was back, so I had nothing to tell me I should be concerned. When we all moved in together, I started seeing him morph into something that was a little more hateful. Scott and I went out to one of the pastures. He said he was going to take care of the prairie dogs because they create such destruction in the ground. And Scott used a pellet gun to kill the prairie dogs. And as he was focusing on one prairie dog, he would say, "This is my mom," and then he would kill the prairie dog.
So long, Mom.
And then he'd say, "This is my brother," and then he'd kill that prairie dog.
Your turn, Dad.
And he would pick them off one by one. It was not a joke. It was not funny to him. And that's when I said, "Tell me one of those prairie dogs doesn't have my face on it."
I wouldn't shoot you. No, I'd do something really special for you.
And it seemed like it was meant to be a threat. It's shocking when somebody says something like that. He didn't just make it up on the spot. He had thought it through. That was a little scary. Is he really that creepy? Obviously he was kidding, or I'm losing my mind. Scott appeared to be a great father.
Put the books away, let's go outside. I'll teach you how to be a man.
Scott.
But his oldest son was more gentle, he was softer, and Scott didn't like that.
What? He's got to learn sometime. Come on, Susie.
He would call him Susie, and I thought it was mean.
You guys go out and I'll have dinner ready here soon.
One evening, the boys were out in the back pasture playing. Everything seemed fine, and shortly after that, his youngest son came running in the house and he said, "Dad said to call 911. His brother has been hurt."
Lori, call an ambulance.
Scott is running with his son in his arms. The steel storm grate that we kept out at the farm, it had fallen on him.
Yes, I need an ambulance right away.
So I called 911 and I said, "My oldest stepson's been injured and I'm hearing my leg."
His leg's been hurt, maybe broken.
As I'm talking to the operator, I see Scott's vehicle take off down the dirt drive, and I said, "Okay, I guess maybe it's not as bad as I thought."
Hi. Yes, and he's being taken to the hospital right now. Thank you.
And we got in the car and we drove to the hospital.
Okay, let's go and catch up with them.
I walked down the hall and I looked into his son's room. Scott's covered in his son's blood, and his son is laying on the table, and all I was thinking is, this kid is not very big. That's a lot of blood.
What's happening?
They said that he was injured very badly in a fall. And I said, "What did he fall off of? There's nothing back there he can fall off of." So that's not the injury he had.
It wasn't a fall. A storm grate fell on him.
No, this is from after, when he fell out of the car, okay? Excuse me? Excuse me.
Scott, what is this? What's going on?
He just fell out of the car.
Scott told me that in the ride to the hospital, his son reached for the window, to unroll the window, to get sick. And instead of opening the window, that he opened the door and he fell out. Scott said he was going about 60. And it seemed so bizarre, but what other explanation would there be for that? And with as much blood as I saw, I really thought we were losing him that night. They put him into a chemically induced coma, so he would stop convulsing. His brain was swelling. When he was able to speak, the first thing he said was, "Why did Dad do this to me?"
Scott.
We were all there when they were taking him out of the coma, and when they started drawing him out and he was able to speak, the first thing he said was, "Why did Dad do this to me?"
Dad did it.
He was afraid.
I don't know why he pushed me.
And the neurosurgeon turned around and he said, "He doesn't know what he's saying. He has a brain injury."
It's okay. He's just confused.
Scott.
It's okay, Lori. I'm just glad he's awake.
I reasoned through it. Scott was taking him to the hospital. Why would he be trying to kill him? It didn't fit.
His memory will clear up over time.
When the neurosurgeon said he doesn't know what he's saying, it just kind of cemented what I already felt. I felt he had a bad memory. This is Scott's Uncle Terry. Scott's Uncle Terry came to live with us to take care of what Scott couldn't take care of while Scott visited his son every day at the hospital. It didn't go very smoothly. He was a very heavy drinker, and he didn't cover himself when he would walk out of the bathroom. Scott said that he wouldn't be there long, and I came home one night from work, and I walked in the house, and all of my furniture was rearranged. I just found it very strange.
Scott?
I walked past the door and saw my white leather sofa was out by the pool. I could see the huge wet spot.
Scott, what happened to my couch?
It was one of Uncle Terry's dogs.
And Scott said, "Uncle Terry's really embarrassed. One of the dogs got sick on your couch." And I said, "That is not dog vomit."
That's a huge stain. There's no way that was a dog.
Maybe it was Uncle Terry and he just blamed it on the dog.
And he says, "Well, maybe he got sick on the couch and he was just embarrassed. But it's no big deal. He won't be around anymore." He had hit some small lottery and he took off, went to Mexico with his new girlfriend, who was a stripper.
Terry?
That's what he said. Said he'd call us when he got there.
I didn't believe what he was telling me. There's no way a woman who's young enough to strip would be interested in Uncle Terry. No way. But I really didn't question it because I was perfectly comfortable with him being out of my house. I was happy about it. And I dropped it. I never discussed it with him again. This is the day Casey graduated high school. She wound up getting into her own place and taking the roommate that introduced her to crystal meth. And when she finally got clean, got her life all put back together, Casey came back to Colorado. She got a great job. She was happy again. And she was completely drug-free. But One day, Scott said that we had a problem, that he found a vial and that it had drugs in it.
I don't want to have to tell you this, but I found this in the couch.
But she's been doing so good.
I was shocked when he brought the vial to me. Casey seemed completely clean.
How could she do it?
I'm sorry.
The boys were still young children, and he only had them part-time, and I knew that I didn't do drugs, and I knew that Scott didn't do drugs. So the only natural thing to think would be that Casey was doing drugs again. I don't want to see my child kill herself. I had to take action.
Casey!
I confronted Casey and told her that Scott had found a vial in the couch, and I had to assume it was hers.
It's not mine, and it's not his.
Casey was pleading with me. She said, "Mom, I swear these are not mine. I would tell you if they were. They are not mine."
You have to believe me. I wouldn't do that. I can't trust you anymore.
I didn't believe my own child. And my plan was immediate. I was going to take her to the police station immediately.
You watch her, and I'm going to get my purse from upstairs.
Mom.
I asked Scott to stay with Casey while I grabbed a couple of things. I just didn't want her to run away. He says she's waiting in the car, and I said, "No, she's not." And I guarantee she just took off. "No, she's fine, she's fine." And sure enough, when we went out, she was gone. When Casey first went missing, every single moment was thinking, where could she possibly be? All I know is Casey is gone. She won't answer my phone calls. When she had not been in touch with her best friend, I knew there was a problem. I drove all over town looking for her. I would think I would see somebody with her hair color, so I would go around the block and come back to see if it was her. I would see people in cars that looked like they could be her. I went to the police to file a missing persons report, and they wouldn't let me do that. That she was over 18 and that it was her right to be missing.
Are you all right?
Scott appeared to be worried about me.
I'm so frustrated.
But Scott was telling me to calm down, just let her do her thing. She's a grown woman, she'll come back when she's not upset with you.
She's an adult. She'll come home when the time is right.
Maybe you're right.
I went back and forth with needing to believe him, because if I didn't believe what he was telling me, then something awful happened to my daughter. He said, "I'm going to take a polygraph to prove you wrong." He passed every question except for one, and that was, "Do you know where Casey is?" Is that the cutest face you've ever seen? You can see the joy in her face. She's just a happy kid. Casey was still very trusting at that age. She had nothing in her life that would tell her she shouldn't trust people. It's just so soon after this that everything went so bad. I would like to crawl through the picture and prevent everything. Casey and CB had been dating maybe 4 or 5 months.
Lori, it's CB.
A few days after Casey left the house, CB called me and said that they had been staying at a motel, that Scott had provided the money for the motel, and that he had been taking Casey to work.
What are you talking about?
I didn't believe what he was telling me, but CB insisted that when Casey first went missing, Scott gave her money, put her on her bike, and told her to take off.
He wouldn't hide that from me, CB.
He put her up in a motel. He had been picking her up every day and taking her to work. And the last day he picked her up and took her to work, she never came home.
No, that's not right. As Scott would tell me this.
And CB said, I don't know why he's lying to you. I saw the truck. I saw him pick her up. He was afraid something happened. I felt something was definitely amiss, but Scott told me he was using his resources with the FBI to ask around and ask about her. Nobody had seen her.
Scott?
When Scott came back, I asked him when he last picked her up.
What's up?
CB called.
And?
And he said that you've been taking Casey to work all this time.
What?
And Scott said that CB is lying. He did not pick her up and take her to work that day.
That's what he said, that you picked her up from the motel?
CB's a drug addict. He lies.
Scott kept convincing me that CB was on drugs. Who should I believe, a normal thinking person or a drug addict? I was just extremely confused.
Just tell me if you've seen her or not.
This is crazy. How can you say that? I'm helping you, and you think I've seen her.
He kind of threw it back on me, like, how could you doubt me? But he said, if I pass a polygraph, can we just not talk about it again?
Would that convince you?
Actually, yes. It would.
I think he thought I would say, no, let's not waste the money. That's ridiculous. You're willing to take a polygraph, so obviously you're innocent.
All right, if it'll get you to trust me again, I'll set something up.
Okay.
I went ahead and let him go forward with it. We went to the center to do the polygraph. I waited in the waiting room. He went in to get his test, and when they opened the door and came out,
Hello.
Hello.
he said he passed every question except for one, and that was, do you know where Casey is?
Besides that, everything seems to check out.
Scott quickly explained to me that because he was probably one of the last of us to see her, that's where he thought that that doubt came in. Like, yes, I know where she last was, and that was in front of the house. And that seemed like a reasonable answer to me. I felt relieved that he passed his test. I can set aside doubting him at all and do things that are more productive.
Scott, I'm so sorry. I'm just so worried about Casey.
You can trust me, right?
Yes.
One day, Scott told me that he went into Casey's bedroom and he found her makeup case on.
See, it's missing.
So that is proof that she was at the house, that she is just avoiding me. He says, look, this is Casey's necklace that's hanging on her doorknob. This is the necklace that CB gave her. I think that's a pretty clear message that she wants it given back to CB and that she's not with CB anymore. And he says that I need to stop worrying and that she'll come back around when she's ready.
She doesn't want you to call the cops on her. That's the only reason she's not here.
It made me feel good that she was around. Those moments are giving me hope that she was in fact at the house. I went into her room often. I would leave money on the bed just in case she would come back. She never took money, but I was still holding out hope that she was alive somewhere. One night, Scott just didn't come home, and a detective knocked on my door, and at this point, Casey had been missing well over a year. And he said, I need to talk to Scott Kimball, and I said, he's not here.
Scott's out working on a case for you guys right now. I'm sure your office can track him down.
The detective said that that was a lie.
He doesn't work for us. We're investigating him.
He was not an agent. He was an informant. A detective knocked on my door, and he said, I need to talk to Scott Kimball.
Scott's out working on a case for you guys right now.
He doesn't work for us. We're investigating him.
What?
I found out pretty much everything he had ever said to me was a lie, including his employment status with the FBI. He was not an agent.
No, that's not right. Scott works for the FBI.
No, he doesn't. He is an FBI informant, but he's a convicted felon.
He had written a bad check in Montana and had served time for that. And now he was an informant. He was a bad guy catching worse guys. But there's a problem. He was on the run.
Beyond his status as an informant, Scott is linked to being the last one to see certain missing persons. Can I show you some pictures? Do you know anything about this woman?
Jennifer Markham was missing. I said, I think that's the girl he told me was in fact dead.
He was on her case trying to solve her murder.
And how about this woman?
They knew Leanne Emery was missing. Scott never mentioned Leanne. I never knew anything about her. The detective asked if I knew if there were any other missing people surrounding Scott, and I said, my daughter is still missing.
My daughter, Casey.
Your daughter.
And it was very obvious that he had no idea that Casey was ever missing.
All right. I think that I should take you down to the station.
Yes, yes.
And he said, I think we're in trouble here.
I don't know anything about poor little Casey. I don't know where she's at. I don't know anything about Casey.
Scott started calling me and telling me that they have the wrong guy. Don't listen to what they're saying. They're just trying to frame him.
I always want Lori to have hope that Casey will come home. Because I don't know any different that she won't come home.
It was easier for me to believe that they might be lying to me and setting him up than to believe that she was gone.
I didn't do anything with Casey. I didn't do anything to Casey.
You have to keep in mind, I'm still holding out hope that Casey is okay. If I stop believing what he's telling me, then it's real. She could really be gone. I would prefer to think I'm losing my mind than to accept the fact that she's really gone. I wanted him to convince me that he was telling me the truth. The FBI called me and they said that Casey's dad and I needed to come down to talk to them. And we went in and we sat down and they started talking. And I'm just watching them and hoping that they say it fast, just rip off the Band-Aid fast. You know, part of me is saying, I don't want to hear it.
No.
This isn't final, nor does it mean that it's your daughter, but we have found the body.
No.
Casey.
We were told that hunters had found human remains. They weren't sure who it was.
We're gonna need some DNA to identify the remains.
We'd like to take some samples.
I had Casey's baby teeth, and so they used them to identify. Sorry, guys. Casey was probably only about 6 months then. She was not ready to walk, but she still thought it was fun to try. Her little legs were like Jell-O. She was just a little giggle bucket. That was Casey's personality from the very beginning. Happy, nothing upset her. She deserved a lot more in life than she got. I miss her. I miss her energy. If we all just had a reset button, just one, I would definitely choose to go back to this time. There are days I think I have forgiven myself, but if I take too much time to think about it, I'm the one who brought him into our lives. There's nobody else and nothing else that's responsible for her being gone. They were investigating the house and looking through everything, and they had pulled back the carpet and they found blood that belonged to Uncle Terry. Uncle Terry had been killed in my living room. I flashed back to the couch, being out by the pool, and never seeing Uncle Terry again.
He didn't win the lottery. He didn't go to Mexico. We know that much. It's real convenient, Scott, that he's hiding out, that Casey's hiding out, and that Jennifer's hiding out, or whatever happened to her.
You know what? I can't tell you anything about where Terry or Casey or Jennifer are. I can't do it.
You mean you won't do it? We all know that all of those people died at the hand of Scott Kimball. This is Leanne Emery. I believe she was the first victim of Scott. Leanne's boyfriend was in prison with Scott. That's how he meets victims, through the boyfriends. This is Jennifer Markham, the Jennifer he was talking about being murdered, and the Jennifer who had the townhouse that he was living in after he had killed her. It was, in fact, the same Jennifer. Unknowingly, I lived in her home. I slept in her bed. I sat on her sofa. I ate off of her dishes. It made me sick to my stomach. Scott pled guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence and to give the location of all of the missing people. The scary part is he will get parole if he is up for parole. He is extremely convincing. We need to keep him behind bars. He is dangerous to anybody he comes in contact with. But more than likely, I won't be here for the parole hearings. They gave me 6 months to 2 years. After the shock wore off, I was actually kind of excited that I get to leave sooner and get to be with my kiddo. When I pass, my plan is to be cremated, and they will open Casey's casket, and my cremains will be in Casey's casket. We'll be together in heaven. That's the only thing that gets me through. There's something better waiting. Casey is the light at the end of the tunnel. Casey is.
It started with the heat, that unbearable Florida heat that sticks to your skin and makes everything feel too real. The kind of heat that preserves secrets. August 1987, Palm Grove. A quiet neighborhood tucked between the mangroves and the Gulf. The air smelled of salt and gasoline. Cicadas screamed from the trees, and somewhere, a scream was swallowed by the night. No one heard it, or maybe they did, and chose not to. At 7:42 a.m., a fisherman found a car half sunk in the canal near Route 12. A pale blue Pontiac, driver's door open, engine still warm. Inside, the smell of iron and algae. In the passenger seat, a leather purse, lipstick, a broken necklace. In the water, a woman's body, face down, hair tangled in the reeds. Her name was Carla Dean, 27 years old, kindergarten teacher, last seen leaving a local diner just before midnight. No struggle reported, no witnesses, just the car, the current, and a silence too heavy to be natural. Detective Roy Mallard arrived before the press could smell blood. He was a hard man, the kind who'd seen too many Florida crimes that never made it past the first week. The kind that knew when something didn't add up. He looked at Carla's hands, no defensive wounds. Looked at her shoes, still clean. Looked at the seatbelt, cut clean through. Someone had staged the scene, dropped the car, walked away. And the canal, with its lazy current, did the rest. By noon, Palm Grove was swarming with deputies, reporters, and neighbors, pretending they didn't love the attention. The air was full of rumor. Some said she'd run away from an affair gone bad. Others whispered about the strange man who'd moved into the house across from her 2 months earlier. Quiet, polite, always mowing his lawn at night. His name? George Weller. Mid-30s, single, worked as a mechanic. Nothing special, except for the fact that no one had ever actually seen him at work. Mallard went to question him that same day. The man opened the door in a sweat-stained shirt, eyes sharp but calm. His voice flat, like static. "Didn't know her well," he said. "She waved sometimes." Mallard looked over his shoulder. The living room was spotless, too spotless. No pictures, no clutter, just the ticking of a clock and a faint smell of bleach. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was enough to remember him. The autopsy ruled Carla's death as homicide, blunt force trauma to the skull, drowning post-mortem. No signs of sexual assault. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. 1987 didn't have the tools to see what was right in front of them. The case grew cold within a year. Palm Grove moved on. The canal dried up. The headlines faded. But for Mallard, the file stayed on his desk long after the department stopped asking about it. 38 years later, in 2025, that same file resurfaced in a digital archive project. A rookie analyst named Dana Corbett stumbled across the unsolved Canal Girl case while reviewing old evidence for DNA updates. A smudge on Carla's blouse, previously labeled unidentifiable stain, was retested using modern sequencing. And this time, the lab found something. Male DNA, partial match. The database hit came from a sample in a completely different state. Georgia, 2005, a burglary case never solved. Same genetic pattern, same mystery. The Florida Bureau of Investigation reopened the file. They reached out to surviving officers. Most were gone. But Roy Mallard, now retired, still lived in Palm Grove. He was 81, half blind, but sharp as ever. When they told him the case was active again, he didn't hesitate. "It was the neighbor," he said. "I told them that 38 years ago." The neighbor, George Weller, had vanished from town a week after Carla's funeral. No forwarding address, no relatives, no digital footprint. It was as if he'd dissolved into the air. The new team began tracing old property records, utility bills, Social Security reissues. A pattern emerged. Between 1988 and 2002, 6 different identities, all in southern states. Same handwriting, same birth date, different names. And every few years, another missing woman, always young, always living within a mile of one of his aliases. The cold case had never been isolated. It was the first in a pattern that stretched decades. But back in 1987, no one saw it. Palm Grove was too small to suspect seriality, too polite to pry. People remember Carla as quiet, kind, the kind who baked cookies for her students and walked home alone after night class. No enemies, no secrets. Except one, the note found in her apartment, never released to the press. A single line written in blue ink. If anything happens to me, it's because I found out. No one ever figured out what she found. Investigators now suspect she'd uncovered something about Weller, something from before he came to Palm Grove. His background checks were clean because they were forged, his mechanic's license fake, his car unregistered. But his behavior matched one familiar pattern in criminology: organized, isolated, calculating. Someone who kills not from impulse, but from the fear of being exposed. Forensic genealogy began to trace Weller's DNA backward through distant relatives. A cousin in Alabama, a great-nephew in Tennessee. The family tree pointed to a birth certificate from Ohio, 1951, belonging to one Gordon Wells. The name wasn't George Weller. It was an alias built on a rearranged version of his own. And Gordon Wells had a record: juvenile assault, animal cruelty, a missing persons inquiry from 1974 involving his girlfriend. That case, too, had gone cold. In Palm Grove, the reopening of the file stirred something raw in the town. Old residents came forward with memories they'd buried. A waitress from the diner remembered seeing Carla talking to a man outside before leaving. Not Weller, but someone driving his car. A neighbor recalled seeing lights flicker in his garage the night of her death. And one elderly woman swore she saw him burning something in his backyard days later. "I thought it was trash," she said. "Didn't know it was evidence." Dana Corbett spent months reconstructing the timeline, piece by piece. The car, the canal, the night air thick with thunder. The phone call Carla made at 11:14 p.m. to her sister. "I think I figured it out." That was the last anyone heard her voice. Police never traced the number she was calling from, until now. The record, digitized from an old rotary exchange, showed the call originated not from the diner, but from the payphone right outside Weller's garage. Every new detail painted a clearer picture, not of the murder, but of the man who'd orchestrated it. Weller had built a life of layers. He volunteered at a church, helped neighbors with their cars, attended local fairs. He blended so well that people forgot to notice his absence. Even now, no one knew where he'd gone. No death certificate, no grave. Just a shadow on an old driver's license. The Florida Bureau tracked his aliases through bank accounts dormant since 2002. One was still active: small deposits, irregular withdrawals, always under the same pattern. The account was tied to a P.O. box in rural Mississippi, recently accessed by someone matching Weller's age. Surveillance footage was grainy but damning. A man with sunken eyes, gray hair, wearing the same brand of mechanic's uniform seen in photos from 1987. The kind of face that knows it's being hunted. By the time agents arrived, the box was empty. The man was gone. Inside the post office trash bin, they found a single item: a yellowed newspaper clipping of Carla Dean's obituary, folded neatly, edges worn. Someone had been carrying it for years. And so the story that began in the heat of Florida was reborn in the cold of evidence rooms and forgotten files. The phrase "cold case" became too literal, frozen decades deep, thawed by a few drops of DNA and a rookie's curiosity. Each thread connected not just a murder, but a life lived in deceit. Every neighbor who'd waved to Weller was unknowingly waving to a ghost. Mallard died a month before the warrant was signed. His last words to the team: "Find her justice." They're still looking. Because justice, after 38 years, isn't about punishment. It's about memory. About dragging the truth out of the dark places where it hides. And somewhere, maybe in another quiet town, a man with a new name listens to the news, sees his old alias flash across the screen, and smiles. The heat returns, the secrets rise, and the ghost of Palm Grove waits by the canal, whispering through the reeds, waiting for the day the last lie surfaces. The day the warrant dropped, the sky over Palm Grove looked the same as it did in 1987, heavy, gray, trembling with heat. The streets hadn't changed much. Same diner, same canal, same line of weather-worn houses staring at each other across the silence. The news broke just before dawn. Florida's oldest unsolved homicide officially reopened. Suspect identified through new DNA evidence. And for the first time in decades, the town felt awake. They came with cameras, microphones, questions no one was ready to answer. Reporters called it the Canal Girl Revival. People who had never met Carla Dean spoke about her like she was family. But those who remembered her, really remembered, stayed quiet. Because they'd seen that story before. The promise of answers, the flash of headlines, and the quiet fade that always followed. At the sheriff's office, Donna Corbett stood in front of the board covered in yellowed photos and digital printouts. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. 38 years of dust had turned into data, and data into truth. The DNA sample from Carla's blouse was confirmed, a 98.7% match to the alias George Weller, traced through 3 generations of relatives. It was conclusive, but it wasn't enough. The man was still missing. Mallard's old notes became their blueprint. His handwriting, shaky and impatient, filled the margins with thoughts no one had ever read. He plans, he waits, he kills to erase. That line became the team's mantra. They called it the eraser pattern. Each victim, each city, each identity, one after another, all connected by a man who disappeared before the crime scene tape even hit the ground. The oldest of Weller's aliases, Gordon Wells, vanished in 1974 after a missing persons case in Ohio. The next, Gregory Wallace, appeared in Alabama in 1979. Then George Weller in Florida, 1987. Then Henry Welsh, Gary Willis, Graham Ward. Every name a mask. Every life, a performance. He'd learned how to live inside the cracks of the system, one step ahead of anyone watching. But not this time. Corbett's team dug into everything. DMV records, Social Security fraud, fingerprint archives that had never been digitized. It took weeks, but one piece finally cracked the timeline open. An insurance form from 1998, filed under Gary Willis, for a wife named Nancy Willis. No record of marriage, no record of Nancy existing before or after that year. A ghost wife for a ghost man. The investigators pulled local files from the small Mississippi town of Larkins Bend, population 3,200. A missing woman named Nancy Pratt, reported in 1999, matched the age, hair color, and last known address of Nancy Willis. The details were too exact to ignore. She'd disappeared from her home just outside town. No forced entry, no robbery, no signs of struggle. The only thing missing was her wedding ring. The pattern repeated itself. Different town, same method. Corbett looked at this evidence photo. The small house, the half-drunk coffee mug, the open window facing the woods. The case had gone nowhere, filed as voluntary disappearance. But the sheriff who'd handled it back then had noted something odd. The husband had left town 2 days before she was reported missing. His name, Gary Willis, traced back to the same post office box where Weller's bank account was still active. They had him. At least they had the map of his crimes. The FBI joined the case under the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. They reconstructed his movements over 4 decades. He never stayed longer than 5 years in one place. Always worked blue-collar jobs, auto repair, construction, handyman gigs. Always lived near waterways or forests. Always disappeared after a woman did. The task force called him the Mechanic Phantom. Corbett hated the nickname. It made him sound mythic, almost cinematic. But the more she read, the more she realized, maybe he wanted that. Maybe the masks weren't just to hide. Maybe they were his way of writing his own legend, one town at a time. One night, long after the others had gone home, she sat in the evidence room staring at Carla's photo. The edges curled, the color faded. She whispered to the air, "What did you find out?" Because that note, the one Carla left in her apartment, had become the spine of the mystery. "If anything happens to me, it's because I found out." Found out what? About him, about someone else, or about herself? The answer came from a box that had been overlooked for years, labeled MISC items. Inside, a folder of witness statements. One of them, half-typed and unsigned, from a man named Tony Marks, a tow truck driver who'd been called to the diner's parking lot the week before Carla's death. He'd been asked to move a blue Pontiac with a busted ignition. The name on the request form? George Weller. The signature? Carla Dean. Mallard had circled it in red ink and written one word in the margin: blackmail. It changed everything. Carla must have discovered that Weller was using false paperwork, fake names, stolen identities, and somehow got involved, willingly or not. Maybe she helped him at first, forged something, and realized too late what she'd stepped into. Maybe she tried to threaten him with exposure. Either way, she'd signed her death warrant. Corbett traced the fake registration number from that 1987 Pontiac. It led to a used car lot in Pensacola that had long gone bankrupt, but the old microfiche files were still in county storage. There, between faded sheets of paper, was a sales record. Vehicle sold to G. Weller. Buyer identification. Temporary license. No photo. On the back of the document, faint but legible, was a thumbprint. They ran it through the national database. It matched. 38 years later, the print belonged to the same man whose DNA was found on Carla's blouse. It was enough for an arrest warrant. Agents moved fast. They tracked the Mississippi P.O. box to a rented trailer 3 miles outside Larkin's Bend. It sat behind a field of dead sugarcane, the kind of place no one would find unless they were told where to look. When they broke down the door, the air inside smelled like dust and rusted oil. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings, missing women, police sketches, crime scene photos. And in the center of the room, pinned above an old workbench, was a photo of Carla Dean. It had been kept clean. No fingerprints, no blood, no sign of the man himself, just his ghost again. But he'd left something behind. A shoebox, sealed with duct tape, hidden under the floorboards. Inside were driver's licenses, keys, lockpicks, and one Polaroid photo that made every investigator in the room go still. A man's hand holding Carla's broken necklace over a dark body of water. The same necklace found in her car. The reflection in the water was faint, but visible. A face. His face. His. Finally, after decades of guessing, the monster had shown himself. The photo was enough for a federal manhunt. They issued a nationwide alert under the name Gordon George Wells Weller. The media ran with it. Cold case killer exposed after 38 years. Neighbor's double life revealed. The mechanic phantom unmasked. Every headline screamed what the town had known, but never said aloud. That evil can mow your lawn, wave to your kids, and disappear before dinner. But Corbett wasn't satisfied. Because the photo, the DNA, the trail, it all felt too perfect, like he'd wanted them to find it. She went back through the shoebox, this time with gloves and patience. At the very bottom, under a false cardboard lining, she found a folded receipt from June 12, 2023, less than 2 years ago. Gas station in Louisiana, paid in cash. The signature on the line wasn't his usual alias. It was new. A name no one had seen before. Grant Weaver. The name was an anagram of Warren G. Tate, another identity he'd used in the late 90s. The man had been playing games with his own past, leaving breadcrumbs just to prove he still could. Corbett knew then what Mallard had meant. He kills to erase. But now he wasn't erasing victims. He was erasing himself, rewriting his life again and again until the truth was unrecognizable. The team followed this gas receipt trail through Louisiana, Arkansas, into Oklahoma. Every stop, every transaction, cash only. No cameras, no witnesses. But at one station, a clerk remembered an old man asking for directions to a scrapyard up north. Said he drove a rusted pickup with a Florida plate and talked with a drawl that didn't match. He said he was heading home, the clerk told them. Didn't say where that was. Home, the word stuck. Corbett stared at the map. The line of towns, the highways, the canals. Each stop formed a loop, back toward the place where it began, Palm Grove, Florida. He was coming back. The realization hit like thunder. A man who'd built his life on running was now circling home. To what? To who? The graves he'd left? The ghost of the woman he'd drowned? Or maybe just to stand one last time by the canal and see if anyone remembered him. The team mobilized immediately. Surveillance drones over the old neighborhood, patrols along Route 12. Locals questioned. Nothing. But at 3:17 a.m., a motion sensor picked up a figure near the old canal bridge, tall, thin, moving slow, carrying something metallic. Deputies rushed the scene. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. All that remained was an old wrench, rusted, engraved with the initials GW. 38 years ago, the same tool had been listed in Mallard's original report, missing from the suspect's garage. He'd come back to return it. The canal water rippled under the moonlight. No footsteps, no tracks, just the sound of frogs and the hum of heat. Palm Grove went silent again, but everyone knew it wasn't over. Not yet. He didn't leave a note with the wrench. He didn't have to. The metal spoke for him. 38 years of silence condensed into a single rusted object lying crooked on the damp concrete, initials staring up at the deputies like a signature on a confession. GW. The same brand, same handle, same missing chip in the grip Mallard had described in his report back in 1987. It was like the past had crawled out of the canal and placed itself neatly at their feet. Forensics bagged it. Cameras flashed. Sirens painted the trees red and blue. But the man who left it was gone, swallowed by the dark like he'd never existed. No tire tracks. No footprints clear enough to lift. Just one scuffed patch of dirt and the faint smell of oil in the air, out of place among the wet grass and stagnant water. By dawn, Palm Grove was awake and terrified. The headline wrote itself. Florida, 1987 cold case suspect returns to scene. Wrench with initials found at canal. Residents locked their doors for the first time in years. Old-timers sat on porches with shotguns that hadn't seen daylight since hurricane season a decade ago. Parents kept kids home from school. The canal, once just a strip of murky water cutting through a sleepy town, became a crime scene again. This time not from something that had happened, but from something that might. Inside the sheriff's office, the mood shifted from cautious hope to predatory focus. Corbett stared at the wrench through the glass of the evidence room. She'd read enough offender profiles to know what this meant. He wasn't just hiding, he was playing, testing them, taunting them. A ghost stepping back into his favorite haunting ground, checking if anyone still remembered his name. He wants to see how close he can get, she said, voice low. He wants to feel the heat again. The task force agreed on one thing. Palm Grove was no longer just part of his past. It was his hunting ground again. They set up surveillance like a net. Unmarked cars rotated through every street near the canal. Cameras went up on power poles and convenience store rooftops. Deputies patrolled the neighborhoods on foot, in pairs, eyes sharp, radios crackling. At night, the town glowed in infrared, and somewhere in that glow, an old man with too many names watched and learned. Because that's what he did best. He'd survived 4 decades by observing before acting, by letting other people's routines become his camouflage. Trash day, church on Sunday, kids biking at 4, dog walkers at 6. He didn't need to blend into chaos. He needed to blend into boredom. The first big break after the wrench wasn't dramatic. No car chase, no shootout, no bloody confrontation. It came in the form of a bored 17-year-old named Kyle Mercer, scrolling through his phone on the back step after midnight, cigarette in hand, ignoring his parents' no smoking in the house rule. He lived 3 streets from the canal, in a ranch-style home with peeling paint and a rusted mailbox. While flicking ash into the grass, he noticed something across the road. An old man, standing very still in the shadow of a jacaranda tree, looking not at the house, not at the street, but at the canal, visible as a thin silver line between the rooftops. Just standing there, not moving, not checking a phone, not walking a dog, just there. The old man turned slightly. For a second, The porch light, dim and yellow, caught his face. Deep lines, thin lips, eyes that didn't match the rest of him. Too bright, too awake. Eyes like high beams on a dark road. Kyle froze. The man didn't wave, didn't nod, just looked at him, then turned and walked away, disappearing down the sidewalk like a shadow being pulled back into the night. The kid almost dismissed it. Almost. But the whole town had been glued to the news for days. The sketch of the suspect, aged up by forensic artists, had been on every screen. Same hollow cheeks, same sloping nose, same cold stare. Kyle stubbed out the cigarette, went inside, locked the door, and made the call. Within 15 minutes, as the street was crawling with law enforcement again. Dogs sniffed, flashlights cut through hedges and backyards. Neighbors peeked through blinds and tried to act like they weren't afraid. But no suspect, no sign of him. Just a description that lined up a little too neatly with the digital composite. Maybe the kid's just spooked from TV, a deputy muttered. Corbett shook her head. Or maybe the TV finally made him visible. She pinned Kyle's statement next to the map of the town, drawing a red line from his house to the canal, then to the old crime scenes. The path made sense. A small loop at the edge of the neighborhood, just enough to taste the past without diving fully in. The profiler they'd brought in from Quantico had a simple theory. He was escalating. The wrench, the midnight walk, the photograph of Carla pinned over his workbench, the gas receipts leading back to Florida. It all pointed to a man who wasn't just running anymore. He was circling, tightening his own noose. Offenders like him, the profiler said in a clipped, clinical tone, often feel a need to revisit their formative crimes as they age. It's about dominance, memory, legacy. He doesn't just want to avoid capture. On some level, he wants to be recognized. Recognized, remembered, named. They decided to use that. The press conference that followed was intentional theater, podium on the courthouse steps, flags behind, cameras in front. Corbett stood beside the sheriff, face unreadable, as they released carefully chosen details. DNA match confirmed. Photo recovered from the Mississippi trailer. Thumbprint tied to the 1987 Pontiac registration. They didn't hold back. They showed the aged composite next to the younger driver's license image from decades earlier. "We know who you are," the sheriff said, looking directly into the cameras. "We know what you did to Carla. We know you killed under other names. It took us 38 years, but the cold case you thought you buried is open, and we're not closing it again until we put handcuffs on you." It wasn't just a statement to the public. It was a message fired like a flare into the dark, aimed at one man. Viewers across Florida watched at home, some murmuring, some changing the channel. But somewhere, in a motel room, a parked RV, a rented room with peeling wallpaper, a man with a stolen identity watched it too. Saw his young face beside the ghost of what he'd become. Saw the wrench in an evidence bag. Saw the word killer under his old alias. And something inside him shifted. Recognition, anger, challenge. That night, the first real crack in their perimeter appeared. At 2:06 a.m., a silent alarm tripped at a small, privately owned storage facility just outside town. The place was half empty, mostly rented by retirees storing old furniture and junk they couldn't bring themselves to throw away. The owner, half asleep and half drunk, didn't bother going to check. But the system still pinged the sheriff's office. By the time deputies arrived, the padlock on Unit C-17 had been cut clean through. Inside, dust motes floated in flashlight beams, boxes, a rusted lawnmower, an old refrigerator. And in the corner, a stack of items that didn't match the rental records. An army green duffel bag, a tool chest, a folded blue mechanic's uniform. The name patch on the uniform read, Henry Welsh, one of his old aliases. The duffel bag held more. Driver's licenses, birth certificates, social security cards, all forged, some half-finished, a kit, a life in a bag designed to be picked up and used whenever he needed to vanish. "He stashed it here," Corbett breathed. "All this time, like a backup identity." But that wasn't the worst part. On the top shelf, hidden behind a stack of paint cans, they found a cardboard box labeled XMAS. Inside, beneath a layer of tangled lights and a cracked plastic reindeer, was a small cassette tape, unmarked except for 3 letters written in blue ink. CD. Carla Dean. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent light above and the distant drone of crickets. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls were closing in around the little rectangle of magnetic tape. They rushed it to the lab. Corbett watched through the glass as technicians coaxed the old cassette back to life, using soft brushes and specialized equipment to keep it from disintegrating. When they finally hit play, the speakers filled with static, a low hiss like wind through dead reeds. Then a voice, female, shaky, young. "This is... I don't know why I'm doing this," she said, breaths uneven. "My name is Carla Dean. If someone finds this, something's wrong. I think I'm in trouble. I think he knows." Corbett's skin prickled. So did everyone else's in that tiny room. On the tape, Carla's voice came in and out, warped by time and cheap hardware. But the fragments that survived were enough. "He's not who he says he is. Papers, different names. I saw in the garage. Licenses. I know it's illegal. But it's more than that. There are photos." Static swallowed her words for a long, painful moment. "He said if I talk, no one will ever find me. But they will, right? They'll find this. They'll know." The tape clicked, rewound slightly, then continued. "His name isn't George. Or maybe it is. I don't know. He watched me at the diner, followed me to the payphone. I thought I could scare him by saying I'd tell. But when he smiled, it's like he'd heard it all before. Like he'd buried it all before." The last thing she said before the recording warped into noise was almost a whisper, barely audible. "If anything happens to me, it's because I found out." The same sentence from the note, the same handwriting. Now a voice, alive and terrified, floating out of 38 years of silence. Nobody spoke when the tape ended. No one needed to. The room was full of the weight of it. Proof not just of his crimes, but of her courage. She'd tried to warn them, in the only way she could. News of the tape leaked faster than any official statement. By evening, every major outlet was running a clip of her voice, polished and cleaned up by audio engineers, subtitles running underneath. "If anything happens to me, it's because I found out." The phrase became a slogan, a rallying cry, a haunting. People played it on their phones, shared it, argued about it in comment sections. To strangers, it was chilling content. To Palm Grove, it was a ghost speaking from under the canal. For the task force, the tape changed the game. It proved motive. It established timeline. It tied Weller to his forged identities, to his garage, to that night. On paper, it was enough to justify the word "solved" in a press release. But the man was still breathing. "Paper isn't justice," Corbett said quietly, later, staring at the same canal where Carla had been found. "He's out there, consuming the story of what he did like it's a show made for him." She wasn't wrong, because while the headlines screamed "cold case solved," while anchors shuffled papers and announced the final answers in authoritative tones, one man stood a few miles away, in the shadow of an abandoned gas station, listening to the radio through the cracked speaker of a stolen car. He heard his old name. He heard Carla's voice. He heard the description of the tape they'd found, the box in the storage unit, the wrench by the canal. He heard the profiler speculate on his psyche like he was a lab specimen. He smiled, not because they were wrong, but because they were close. Too close. In the dim light, his face was a weathered map of the years he'd outrun them. Sunspots, scars, wrinkles. The mechanic's hands were still there, knuckles rough, nails stained with oil. But the eyes were unchanged, sharp, hungry, evaluating. He turned off the radio. Silence rushed in. He thought about the storage unit, the trailer, the canal, the kid on the porch who'd held his gaze a second too long. He counted all his mistakes, one by one, like beads on a rosary. Then he thought about something else. The one place they hadn't touched yet. The one piece of his past that hadn't been dug up and displayed. The house across from where Carla used to live. The house that had belonged, on paper, to George Weller. Someone else owned it now. Fresh coat of paint. New family, new furniture. But under the cosmetic fixes, the bones were the same. The garage floor with tiny fissures where oil had once pooled. The attic he'd used as a private archive. The concrete patch in the backyard he'd poured himself late one night, telling neighbors it was for a patio project he never finished. The investigators had walked through once, early in the reopened case, just long enough to say they'd done it. No visible evidence remained. No bloody souvenirs, no hidden photographs, just the faint echo of something wrong. He knew they'd be back now, with cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, sledgehammers if necessary. He couldn't erase the past this time, but he could still choose where the story ended. And as the Florida night wrapped thick around him, as the old pickup rolled quietly toward Palm Grove's sleeping streets, one unresolved truth pulsed like a heartbeat under the surface of the town. They had his voice, his DNA, his aliases, his tape, his wrench. They did not have him. Not yet. The new family didn't know their house was famous. To them, it was just a cheap 3-bedroom in a quiet Florida neighborhood. A little worn, a little crooked, but with a big yard and a garage for storage. The real estate agent never mentioned the canal. Never mentioned 1987. Never mentioned that across the street, someone had once watched a young teacher leave for work and never come home. They found out from the sirens. Red and blue light washed across the front lawn just after sunrise. Unmarked cars lined the curb. Crime scene tape unrolled with a dry hiss, cutting their world in half. A woman in an oversized t-shirt stood in the doorway, clutching a toddler, face pale, eyes flicking from badge to badge, trying to understand why her home had a perimeter. Corbett showed her ID, voice steady, posture calm. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Corbett with the Florida Bureau of Investigation. We need access to your property. This is about an old case connected to the house. You're not in trouble, but we have reason to believe there may be evidence here." The woman swallowed, nodding too quickly. Is this about that man on the news? The neighbor? The cold case?" Corbett didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. The answer was all around them, moving in careful, efficient patterns. Forensic techs hauling equipment, deputies stringing tape, a ground-penetrating radar unit being unloaded from a van. Inside, the house was ordinary, family photos on the wall, toys on the floor, a half-finished bowl of cereal sweating on the kitchen table. Ordinary, except for the way every creak in the floorboards suddenly felt like a secret. They started with the garage. Mallard's old notes had described it as surgical. Back then it had been empty except for tools, a workbench, and a single chair positioned facing the street, as if he'd spent nights just watching. Now, boxes lined the walls. Bicycles hung from hooks. The smell was cardboard and detergent instead of oil and metal. Still, when Corbett stepped over the threshold, she could feel him. Not as a ghost, but as a pattern. The way the space was arranged, the way the rafters seemed to bend down, listening. "Get the luminol going," she said. They sprayed. They waited. The overhead lights clicked off, and the room fell into a blue-black hush, broken only by the hum of the portable lamps. For a moment, nothing. Then faint shapes bloomed on the concrete like underwater constellations. Not pools, not splashes, lines, streaks, drag marks. "Look at that," one tech whispered. Whatever was here, it was moved more than once. Years had worn it down. Attempts to scrub had smeared it out. But history leaves residue even when you think you've erased it. Out back, the radar team focused on the one thing that hadn't changed since 1987, the concrete slab near the fence line. A crude rectangle, slightly raised, wrong color for the rest of the yard. The current homeowner thought it had been a half-finished patio poured by some previous occupant. Mallard had flagged it as suspicious. No follow-up ever made it past the first layer of bureaucracy. Now, almost 4 decades later, a sleek machine rolled slowly across its surface, sending waves into the ground and reading the echoes. The monitor flickered with jagged lines and blurs that only the trained eye could decipher. "Anomalies," the specialist said bluntly. "At least 2 distinct disturbances, about 3 feet down. Shapes are irregular but consistent with burials." The words fell heavy. The homeowner heard anyway, despite Corbett's best effort to keep her inside. She clasped a hand over her mouth, whispering, "God, oh God, my kids play over there. They moved her to a neighbor's house before the jackhammers came out." The sound shattered the morning. Cement cracked under each blow, fragments flying, dust blooming into the air like pale smoke. Neighbors gathered behind the tape, phones up, recording the destruction of something they'd never realized was wrong. The slabs came up in hunks, revealing dirt the color of old bruises. Spades bit into the soil, gloves darkened, someone cursed under their breath. Then, soft and inevitable, came the sentence everyone knew was coming but hoped not to hear. "We've got bone." The tech said it clinically, but the crowd at the tape flinched like they'd been struck. Cameras zoomed in, hungry. A helicopter from a local station buzzed overhead, circling like a vulture. For a moment, the whole town held its breath. Piece by piece, the ground gave up what it had been guarding. Not one body. Two. Two skeletons, interlaced by roots and time. No clothing, no IDs. Just the stubborn whiteness of bone and the dark, damp earth that had tried to swallow them. Corbett stood over the pit, jaw clenched. She'd worked scenes like this before, but this was different. This wasn't just confirmation, it was escalation. This wasn't just about Carla, she said quietly. This was a workshop. The medical examiner leaned in, voice low. One's smaller, pelvic structure suggests female. The other, possibly female as well. We won't know ages until we get them back to the lab. But the decomposition, they've been here a long time. Longer than 38 years? Could be, could also be less. We need analysis, but one thing's clear. The examiner's eyes met hers. He didn't just start with Carla, and he didn't stop with her either. Reporters had their headline an hour later. Florida cold case home yields 2 more bodies. Possible serial burial site discovered under family's yard. The phrase neighbor's secret double life suddenly felt too small. Inside the house, away from the cameras, the search continued. They tore up floorboards carefully, lifted heating vents, checked behind outlets. In the attic, a tech pushed aside insulation and found a gap in the beams, just wide enough for a metal tin. It was old, rusted around the edges, the kind of container that should have held loose nails or screws. Instead, when they pried the lid open, they found paper. Dozens of slips, torn from notebooks, magazines, newspapers, dates, names, partial addresses. Some were crossed out, some circled, some starred, hard enough to puncture the page. It wasn't a diary, it was a shopping list. Corbett flipped through them, hands steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. June 14th, C. Dean, Route 12. Check car paperwork. July 3rd, diner girl, late shifts, lives alone. And Pratt, new license Mississippi, practice signature. The ink changed over the years. Ballpoint gave way to felt tip, thick strokes to thin. Some notes were written in shaky block letters, others in cramped cursive. But the voice running through them was the same, detached, calculating, treating human lives like tasks to be checked off. He'd kept these above his head, slept under them, ate under them, lived under them. "Bag everything," Corbett said. "Full documentation. This isn't just evidence, this is intent." As they worked, the profiler paced the hallway, muttering to himself. He compartmentalized. Garage for work, yard for disposal, attic for long-term planning, everything in zones. That's why he lasted so long. He didn't mix his worlds, until now. "What do you mean, until now?" Corbett asked. The profiler stopped, staring out the window at the canal glittering dully in the heat. Coming back was messy, leaving the wrench, abandoning the trailer, letting the storage unit trip an alarm. That's not careful. That's emotional. He's getting sloppy, or he's getting tired, or he wants this story to catch up to him on his terms. His terms. The words hung in the air. Out on the street, a teenage girl pushed her bike past the edge of the tape, lingering just long enough to stare. She wasn't alive when Carla died. Neither were most of the reporters. To them, this was history. To the man they were hunting, it was unfinished business. While the town gorged on live updates, he stayed invisible. He watched from places no one thought to look. Reflections, rear-view mirrors, the corner table at a fast food restaurant where the TV played the news on a loop. A coin-operated laundry where someone left a newspaper behind. A church parking lot where a radio talk show host breathlessly recounted the discovery of multiple bodies in the killer neighbor's yard. Every new detail was a mirror shoved in his face. He saw the slab broken, the pit open, the bones bagged. He saw the old house behind yellow tape, its secrets dragged into the light. He saw the word monster sprinkled generously like seasoning into every broadcast. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to fear. Not of prison, not of judgment. Those were abstractions. He'd avoided them his whole life. Fear of something smaller, sharper, being exposed, being defined by someone else. They were narrating him now, choosing the words, giving him nicknames he hadn't chosen for himself. The mechanic phantom, the canal neighbor, the face in the garage. He'd spent decades building masks, and in a matter of days, they'd ripped most of them off. Back at the sheriff's office, Corbett stood in front of the timeline board, markers squeaking across white surfaces crowded with faces and dates. Carla, Nancy, unidentified 1, unidentified 2. A line of cold case flyers from other states pinned beside them. Missing, presumed dead, never found. Women who lived near his aliases. Women who disappeared when he moved on. The cassette tape with Carla's voice played in her head on a loop. He watched me at the diner. He followed me to the payphone. He'd heard it all before, buried it all before. What if Carla wasn't his first who saw the pattern, she said suddenly. What if she was just the first who left a record of it? The room went quiet. They'd been so focused on tying him to the known victims that they'd overlooked one possibility. There might be more people like her. People who'd noticed the cracks in his identity, the gaps in his story. People who'd tried to speak up, in small, desperate ways that never made it to an evidence box. Old letters, journal entries, confessions to friends who weren't believed. If he kills to erase, Corbett continued, then anyone who gets too close to his truth becomes a target. Carla found his papers. Nancy saw something. Others might have too. So what's he erasing now? A deputy asked. We've already got him pinned on DNA, prints, tape, graves. What else is there? Corbett looked at the newest additions to the board. Screenshots of recent news segments, social media posts, podcasts already spinning the story into content. His control, she said. He's losing control of how he's remembered. That might be the one thing he can't tolerate. In the afternoon, the lab called. The bones under the slab belonged to 2 women. One in her early 20s, dead approximately 35 to 40 years. The other late 30s, dead roughly 25 years. Both likely Caucasian. Both showed signs of blunt force trauma to the skull. And on the broken left wrist of the younger skeleton, there was a fragment of metal still hooked around a bone. A bracelet clasp. The design was cheap, mass-produced. But on the underside, almost invisible, someone had scratched 3 letters with something sharp, hurried and shallow. GW. He'd signed his work and buried it. Within hours, missing persons databases were combed. An old file from 1990 surfaced. A hitchhiker last seen near a service station off I-10. Bracelet described in the report. Thin silver band with initials scratched inside by boyfriend, GW. Witnesses at the time said she'd been talking to a mechanic who offered her a ride. The town's fear hardened into rage. Outside the sheriff's office, a small crowd formed. People held handmade signs. Justice for Carla. Find him. We remember. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't even a protest. It was a vigil that didn't know where to go. Because there was no grave to stand over with his name on it. No courtroom to pack. No bars to stare at. Just the floating, sour knowledge that he was somewhere close enough to smell the salt in the air, close enough to hear the chant if it got loud enough. That night, the family from the house stayed in a motel off the highway. TV turned low, their kids asleep between them. The mother stared at the cracked ceiling, thinking about the backyard, the slab, the bones. In another room, 3 doors down, a man with tired eyes and a duffel bag sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the same low murmur of the same channel. When the segment about the dig came on, he watched without blinking. He remembered every swing of the shovel, every pour of cement. Every night he'd stood at the window afterward, staring at the smooth slab, convincing himself it was done. Now it was open. His past laid out in plastic and evidence bags. His secrets turned into bullet points on an anchor's script. The motel's ice machine rattled to life down the hall, abrupt and jarring. He didn't flinch. On the screen, Corbett appeared for a brief clip, eyes dark, voice calm. We have identified additional remains and are actively working to match them to missing persons cases nationwide. We urge anyone who lived near Mr. Weller under any of his known aliases to come forward with information. No detail is too small. He muted the TV, came forward. Information, detail. He'd always known it wouldn't be the bodies that got him in the end. It would be people, the ones he'd underestimated, The ones who'd stored away small, strange memories and never connected them until someone asked decades later. The waitress who remembered his hands shaking when he paid for coffee. The neighbor who watched him dig at night. The cashier who noticed he always paid cash, always wore long sleeves in the heat. The kid on the porch who saw his face under the jacaranda tree and recognized something off. He could leave town again, change the plates, change the name. There were still a few identities he'd never had to use. Clean ones, untouched. But they'd already mapped his habits. They knew his highways. They understood the loops he drew on maps inside his head. Running was a pattern, and patterns could be hunted. Slowly, deliberately, he stood and moved to the window. The motel parking lot glowed weakly under sodium lamps, cars sitting in crooked rows, insects orbiting the lights like planets. Across the lot, a patrol car rolled by, not stopping, just passing through, an extra layer of visibility in a town that suddenly couldn't sleep. He watched it go, expression unreadable. In the reflection of the glass, he saw his own face superimposed over the red and blue flash. For the first time, it looked old to him, soft around the edges, mortal. He placed a hand flat against the cool window pane, fingertips ghosting over his own reflected features. He didn't speak out loud. He didn't have to. The decision was already there, solid and cold as the wrench he'd left by the canal. He would not let them finish this story without him. He drove without headlights for nearly an hour, hugging the shoulder of the old coastal highway. The kind of road where the asphalt bleeds into sand and the trees lean over like they're whispering secrets. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the faint rattle of a wrench somewhere in the back. Not the same one he'd left, but its twin. He always kept a spare. The dawn light came slow, smearing pink over the swamp. He passed a gas station, closed. A bait shop, half collapsed. A road sign riddled with bullet holes. It all looked the same as it did when he left. Time had moved on everywhere else, except here. Here, Florida was frozen in its own fever dream. He stopped at the edge of Palm Grove, where the first houses began. The town's new welcome sign looked wrong to him. It was cheerful, freshly painted, a smiling pelican beside the words, "A safe community since 1956. The irony made him laugh under his breath, a soft, rusty sound that didn't belong to joy. He knew what they were doing now. The patterns were predictable. He'd lived inside them long enough to understand. More searches, more press, more lights in the dark. They'd dig up every inch of his past until there was nothing left but him. So he came back for the only thing that still belonged to him, the ending. He parked a few streets over from the canal, behind a row of abandoned trailers, the same ones where teenagers used to sneak cigarettes and cheap beer. The engine ticked as it cooled. The heat was already climbing, wrapping around him, thick and wet. He sat for a long time, watching the town wake. A jogger passed. A garbage truck groaned. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. Life went on, oblivious. He thought of the tape, her voice, trembling and brave. "If anything happens to me." He hadn't heard it since that night. He hadn't meant for her to record it. He'd just left the cassette in the car, part of his collection, songs taped off the radio. When he found it missing, he assumed she'd taken it to spite him. He hadn't realized she'd turned it into her last confession. She'd been smarter than he gave her credit for. He should have destroyed it. He should have destroyed everything. Instead, he left pieces of himself scattered like breadcrumbs. Fingerprints on old forms, DNA on a blouse, the habit of returning to the same kind of town with the same kind of house. He'd always believed he was too careful to be caught. Now, watching the sun climb over the canal, he saw the arrogance for what it was. He hadn't been invisible, just ignored. At the sheriff's office, Corbett hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her desk was a landscape of paper cups and files and photos she didn't want to look at but couldn't stop. The discovery of the two bodies had detonated the investigation, sending shockwaves through every neighboring state. Tips were flooding in, truckers reporting sightings, waitresses recalling customers who looked kind of like him, self-styled amateur detectives digging through cold case databases, 99% noise, 1% potential. But one call stood out. A man named Harold Drennan, 83 years old, living in a care facility 3 counties north. He said he'd known a George Weller in 1988, claimed they'd worked together at a construction site in Pensacola. Said George had been quiet, polite, until one afternoon when a stray dog wandered onto the lot and George beat it to death with a shovel. No reason, no warning, no change in expression. "I told the foreman," Harold rasped. "But he said to let it go, said George was a veteran, probably had flashbacks." Corbett thanked him, wrote it down, added it to the growing mosaic of red flags ignored. One man's monster is another man's neighbor. That's how he survived. By late afternoon, she had the team out canvassing motels and truck stops within a 50-mile radius. His pattern was always the same: transient lodging, cash payments, early departures. The photo of his face, aged, colorized, digital, was plastered on every bulletin board from here to Tallahassee. Still, she felt it in her gut. He was closer than that. She drove to the canal herself. Windows down, radio low, the same humid air pressing against her lungs. The place was quiet again. The tape was gone, the press had left, and the yellow ribbon fluttered weakly in the wind like a fading memory. But the feeling lingered. Something unfinished, something waiting. She parked by the old bridge, the same spot where the wrench had been found. The asphalt shimmered. In the water, dragonflies hovered like tiny sentinels. She imagined him standing here, watching, breathing this same air. What was he thinking? What did he want? She didn't know that just a few hundred yards away, behind the tree line, he was doing exactly that, watching her. Through a tangle of vines and palmettos, he could see her reflection in the windshield, her hair pinned back, her posture sharp and patient. She wasn't like the others. The way she moved, the way she studied the scene, it reminded him of Mallard. Same quiet focus, same refusal to be intimidated by silence. He respected that. But respect didn't mean mercy. He waited until she drove off, then stepped out from the brush. The air was thick with mosquitoes, the mud sucking at his shoes. He walked to the edge of the canal and stared down at his reflection. The same face he'd seen in motel mirrors and gas station bathrooms. The same face the whole world now recognized. He smiled at it, tired, resigned, defiant. Then he knelt and reached into the water. His hand came up coated in silt, tiny bubbles rising around his fingers. He dug for something he'd hidden long before the first search warrants, long before the cameras. A small waterproof tin, wrapped in black plastic, buried under a ledge of rock. When he opened it, the past breathed out. A bundle of photos, still dry, still sharp despite the years. Faces, all women, some smiling, some blurred by motion. Carla among them, Nancy, others no one had named yet. Proof of what he was, proof of what he'd done. He stared at them one by one, and for the first time he didn't feel power. He felt exhaustion. It was all so small now. The rituals, the hiding, the lies. The way he'd thought each act made him untouchable. Time had stripped it of meaning. The world had moved on without him, and all that was left were headlines and ghosts. He lit a match. The flame trembled in the wind before catching. The photos curled, blackened, dissolved into ash. He watched them burn until nothing remained but heat and smoke rising off the water. Then he tossed the tin back into the canal and stood. The firelight flickered on his face, and for a moment it almost looked like he was disappearing. He wasn't running anymore. He was ending it. At 2:11 a.m., a 911 call came in from a night clerk at the Palm Grove Motor Inn, reporting a disturbance in room 9. Screaming. Then silence. When deputies arrived, the door was ajar. Inside, the room was empty except for a single open duffel bag on the bed and a stack of neatly folded clothes. In the center of the table sat a tape recorder, the same model as the one found in the storage unit, and a handwritten note. Corbett arrived 20 minutes later. The room smelled faintly of gasoline and sweat. On the wall above the bed, scrawled in grease pencil, were 3 words. "This ends here." The recorder was still running. She pressed play. Static. Then his voice, older, raspier, but unmistakable. Calm, almost conversational. "They say every story needs an ending. You've been writing mine for me piece by piece like I was some animal in a cage. Maybe that's fair. Maybe that's what I earned. But you don't know me. You don't know what started all this. A long pause, the sound of him exhaling. I killed Carla because she looked at me and saw it. Not the names, not the lies. It. The thing I've carried since before any of this. She saw it, and she wasn't afraid. That's what made me do it. Because if she wasn't afraid, then I was. Static again, then softer. I've lived more lives than I can count. Every one of them was real for a while. The jobs, the houses, the people. I thought I could keep starting over, but it all catches up. Even ghosts get tired. He coughed, a wet rattling sound. They're digging in the wrong place. Not for bodies, for reasons. There aren't any. I did it because I could. Because no one stopped me. Because the world let me slip between cracks so wide you could drive a truck through them. The tape clicked faintly, then resumed. You'll find what's left of me before sunrise. You'll get your ending. Call it solved, call it closure, call it whatever makes it easier to sleep. Another pause, then one last whisper, almost a laugh. Tell her she was right. I did bury it all before. The recording ended in silence. Outside, deputies were already spreading out in widening circles from the motel. One found footprints leading toward the canal. Another found tire tracks near the service road. Then, half a mile east of the bridge, they found the truck. Engine still running, door open, radio humming static. The body was in the water, face down, hair fanned like seaweed, one hand still clutching a wrench. No ID, no wallet. But there was no question who it was. George Weller, Gordon Wells, Gary Willis, Henry Welsh, the mechanic phantom. The man who'd built a lifetime out of false names finally had none. They pulled him out under the same sun that had risen over Carla Dean's car 38 years earlier. The water looked the same. The smell was the same. Even the silence felt identical. Heavy, waiting, like the world had exhaled but not yet breathed back in. Corbett watched from the bank as they zipped the body bag. Around her, the press cameras were already flashing, capturing the scene, turning it into content. Cold case solved, fugitive dead. The story was tidy now, packageable, safe, but she didn't feel victory, only emptiness. Because for all the evidence, all the answers, all the bones and names, there was still one thing she couldn't erase. The echo of Carla's voice on that tape, brave and trembling, knowing what was coming. If anything happens to me, it did, and the world had let it. Corbett closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the canal, the slow ripple of water against stone, the whisper of reeds in the wind, the heartbeat of a place that had seen too much. Somewhere behind her, a reporter called her name. She didn't answer, because this wasn't closure. This was aftermath. And in the distance, as the first sirens faded, Palm Grove looked exactly like it had before. Quiet, ordinary, sunlit, the kind of town where nothing like this was ever supposed to happen. But it had, and it would again. The official cause of death was drowning. The report said it clinically, as if the water alone had done it. No struggle marks, no defensive wounds, no ligature, no bullet, no blade. Just a body in a canal and lungs full of filthy Florida water. The medical examiner checked the boxes, signed the line, and moved on to the next file. On paper, it was clean, neat, almost poetic. But Corbett had been around long enough to know that nothing about this story was neat. She stood over the light box in the lab, staring at the autopsy photos, the same canal mud caked on his hair that had once clung to Carla's, the same algae staining his clothes, the wrench still bagged on the side table, metal dark, grip worn smooth. His face looked smaller without motion, without malice. Just another old man who'd died alone. He was alive when he went in, the examiner said beside her. Classic drowning. Water in the lungs, foam at the mouth, no sign of post-mortem staging. Corbett watched the still shot of his hand, fingers curled, knuckles pale. What about drugs? A little alcohol, trace sedatives, but nothing lethal. Maybe something to steady his nerves. He knew what he was doing. She nodded, but something tugged at the back of her mind. The tape in the motel room, the neat stack of folded clothes, the handwritten message on the wall. This ends here. Suicide as confession, death as closure. The story tied itself in a bow. Too easy. Outside, the world swallowed the narrative whole. By noon, every channel was running the banner. Florida, 1987 cold case suspect dead. Investigators call it the end of a decades-long nightmare. Panels of experts dissected his psychology. Old neighbors gave interviews on porches, talking about how quiet he'd been, how polite, how normal. True crime podcasts recorded emergency episodes. Hashtags trended. Someone edited Carla's voice from the tape over slow drone footage of the canal and uploaded it with dramatic music. If anything happens to me, it had happened, and now it was content. The sheriff held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. Corbett stood off to the side, hands folded, face unreadable. "We can now say, with confidence," the sheriff announced, "that the man responsible for the 1987 murder of Carla Dean and likely multiple other victims across several states is dead. Through DNA, forensic evidence, and his own recorded statements, we have effectively closed this cold case. Justice has been delayed, but not denied." The words rolled out smooth, practiced. Applause scattered weakly through the crowd. A few people cried, a few clapped harder than they meant to. Closure is a powerful drug, even when it's watered down. When it was her turn at the podium, Corbett didn't talk about closure. She talked about names. "Today is not about him," she said, the microphone suddenly too loud. "It's about Carla. It's about Nancy. It's about the women we haven't identified yet. It's about every person who lived next door to a lie and never knew. We will keep working until we know every name, until we've told every story that he tried to erase." It sounded good, strong. But when she stepped away, the questions came anyway. "Agent Corbett, do you personally believe this case is solved? Do you think he had accomplices? Can you confirm the total number of victims?" She didn't answer the way they wanted. She just said, "We are still investigating," and walked back inside. Because solved is a word that fits nicely in headlines. In reality, it was messier. The motel room, for one thing, wouldn't stop nagging at her. Later that night, she went back, alone. The yellow tape fluttered in the humid breeze. Room 9 was still sealed, the doors lock-tagged, the "Do Not Enter" sign hanging sideways. She signed in on the log, pulled on gloves, and stepped inside. The bed was stripped, mattress stained with the outline of a body that had slept there for too many nights. The duffel bag was gone, contents logged and boxed in evidence. The tape recorder sat in an empty plastic tub on the table, its job done. The words on the wall had been photographed, traced, sampled. "This ends here." She walked closer, studying the strokes. Thick, hesitant, pressed hard into the paint, as if he'd needed the resistance. The letters slanted slightly upward, the kind of hand that had written a dozen names on forged IDs. And yet, graphology came back with something interesting. The lab tech's voice from earlier that day echoed in her head. The note on the wall, the writing on the motel registration card? They're his, no doubt. But the little note left under the recorder? The tech had held up a photo, a scrap of torn stationery that read simply, "Press play." "That's not him," the tech said. "Different pressure, different angle, different stroke patterns. We ran a preliminary comparison. It belongs to someone else, unknown. Someone else had been in that room. Someone close enough to touch his recorder, to hand him the pen, to slide that little instruction under the machine and walk away. Someone who wanted to make sure the story was heard." Corbett stared at the blank space on the table where the recorder had sat. Imagining the scene. Two people, one old, one unknown. A conversation that hadn't made it onto tape. They say every story needs an ending. What had he left out? She stood in the silence, listening to the faint hum of the motel air conditioner. The distant buzz of a late-night infomercial from another room. Outside, tires hissed over wet asphalt. Somewhere down the hallway, someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny. It all felt wrong. He had chosen the canal, yes. He had chosen the tape. He had chosen the line on the wall. But someone had chosen to help him stage it. The next morning, while the town tried to convince itself it could breathe again, the lab called with another wrinkle. "We pulled prints from the tape recorder and the faucet in the motel bathroom," the analyst said. "Most of them are his. But there's a secondary set, smaller hands, younger, no match in AFIS." "And the room?" Corbett asked. A couple partials from housekeeping, motel manager, nothing useful, but the unknown set is definitely not occupational. They're on the door handle, the chair, the recorder, the note. Whoever they belong to, they were in that room for more than a minute. She wrote it down. Unknown prints, unknown handwriting, unknown presence in the last hours of his life. Suicide, yes, but not solitude. While the forensic puzzles multiplied, Palm Grove tried on normalcy like a shirt that no longer fit. The canal became a memorial. Flowers appeared on the bank, bright plastic bouquets that didn't wilt in the heat. Someone painted a mural on the wall near the bridge. Carla's face in soft colors, eyes turned toward the water, haloed by the words, "We remember." Kids stopped to read the name they'd grown up hearing in hushed tones. Tourists took photos. It became a landmark, geotagged and shared. Carla's sister, Emily Dean, gave an interview on the steps of the courthouse. She held a framed picture of Carla, the edges worn from years of handling. "They're saying it's over," Emily said, voice shaking. "They're saying this is justice, but my sister spent 38 years at the bottom of a file cabinet labeled unsolved. He got to live. He got to move. He got to reinvent himself over and over again. I'll accept that he's dead. I won't accept that this fixes anything." The clip went viral. Corbett watched it from her office. The sound turned low. Emily's anger was righteous, honest. It cut cleaner than any statement she could write. In the background of the shot, the courthouse facade loomed. The same building where Mallard had once carried the thin new file that no one believed in. Her phone buzzed. "Unknown number, out of state?" She answered out of habit. "Agent Corbett?" The voice on the other end was thin, brittle with years and cigarettes. "You don't know me," the woman said. "My name is Marla Jennings. I live in Oklahoma now, but I grew up in Alabama. I saw your face on the news. That man, the one from Florida, I think he knew my sister." The story was familiar in its structure, different in its details. Marla's sister, Leanne, had vanished in 1983, last seen getting into a pickup with a man who worked at the local garage. Name on the work order, Greg Wallace. "We told the police," Marla said. "They said she probably ran off with some boy. Said she'd call if she wanted to be found. But I kept her letters. She wrote about him. Greg. She said he was older, quiet, helped her with her car. I saw his picture on TV and I swear to God, Agent, it's him. Just older." Corbett asked for everything. The letters, the photos, any documentation. A day later, a scan came through. A crinkled Polaroid of a young man standing beside a rusted Chevy, grease on his hands, sun in his eyes, smile small and forced. The jawline matched. The nose, the way he held himself slightly off-center, like he was never truly comfortable standing still. Alias number 3. Another state, another vanished girl. The map on her wall grew more red string. But when she cross-checked the dates against his verified work history, a snag appeared. According to payroll records from Pensacola, Greg Wallace had clocked in there 2 days after Leanne disappeared. Same name, different state, impossible distance by car in the time reported. He couldn't have been in both places at once, unless the records were forged, or unless someone else had been using the name. The thought slid in cold and unwelcome. He'd survived by building identities, ID kits, driver's licenses, certification cards. He'd left behind entire personas in storage units and attics. It was possible, more than possible, that someone along the way had bought or stolen one, learned from him, imitated him, or helped him. The profiler didn't like the idea. "His pathology is solitary," he argued, pacing in front of the board. "Control, secrecy, compartmentalization. These guys don't usually share the sandbox." "Usually," Corbett repeated, "but we keep trying to cram him into a box that makes sense. What if he stepped outside it once? Twice? What if someone saw how disappearances followed him like a wake and decided to ride it? The motel prints, the handwriting, the misplaced timeline. Too many small fractures in their clean ending." Before they could push further, the world shoved another headline under their door. 2 weeks after his body was pulled from the canal, a state trooper in Louisiana responded to an abandoned car at a roadside motel off I-10. Cheap place. Neon sign missing letters. The room smelled of bleach and old cigarettes. On the bed, a woman, late 20s, covered with a sheet. Blunt force trauma to the head. No sign of sexual assault. No defensive wounds. On the bedside table, a motel Bible, a remote, and a folded newspaper. The paper was open to the crime section. The top article, Florida 1987 cold case solved. Neighbor's secret double life exposed after 38 years. Someone had circled the headline in red. Underneath, written in the margin in block letters too careful to be casual, were 4 words. This doesn't end here. There were no usable fingerprints, no security cameras, no witnesses who remembered anything more specific than some old guy at check-in and some younger one buying a soda from the machine. When Corbett got the call, she stared at the crime scene photos for a long time before speaking. Same MO, same precision, same absence of struggle, but the timestamp on the CCTV from the gas station next door nailed the date. The murder had happened the night before his body was found in the canal. He couldn't have done both, unless he was in 2 places at once, unless he had help, unless the monster Palm Grove finally laid to rest wasn't the only one that had been living next door. The photos from Louisiana landed in Corbett's inbox like an aftershock. Same cheap motel layout, same pattern of violence, same absence of struggle. A young woman on a sagging mattress, head split clean by something blunt and heavy, eyes open and empty, body positioned like she'd just fallen asleep and never woke up. On the nightstand, the folded newspaper with his face, his headline, his story circled in bleeding red ink. Underneath, those 4 words, "This doesn't end here." The timestamp on the motel registry nailed the check-in time, 7:23 p.m., 2 days before his body was pulled from the Florida Canal. Witnesses told the trooper they'd seen an older man at the front desk, alone, quiet, paid cash, didn't want a receipt. The Louisiana clerk remembered his hands. Not his face, not his eyes, his hands. Grease in the wrinkles, nails chewed down, mechanic hands. It lined up too well, too familiar. Except the murder didn't. The woman in Louisiana, Andrea Cole, 29, traveling alone, car trouble on the highway, took the cheapest room she could find. She called her mother at 9:02 p.m., said she was tired, said she'd get the car looked at in the morning. The room phone never rang again. Sometime between that call and dawn, someone let themselves in, swung once with perfect precision, and walked out without leaving a footprint the cameras could see. He was already on his way back to Florida, or someone wanted them to think so. Back at the Palm Grove Sheriff's Office, the task force crowded around a screen while the Louisiana trooper briefed them over video. Grainy CCTV from the motel lobby flickered on loop. At 7:23, a figure stepped into frame. Baseball cap, glasses, collar up, older, stooped, moving like his joints hurt, paid in cash, signed the ledger, took the key. The clerk, bored, barely glanced up. "Freeze it," Corbett said. They zoomed in on the hand as it slid the cash across the counter. The knuckles were knotted, the veins raised. On the back of the hand, a pale crescent of an old scar. Same place as in Weller's driver's license photo decades earlier. The profiler exhaled like someone had punched him. "That's him," he said. "It has to be. That's his injury. That's his gait. He stopped there, killed her, then drove back to Florida and drowned himself." It was a neat theory, until Corbett asked for the stills from the security camera over the vending machines in the hallway. The trooper emailed them. Time code, 11:41 p.m. Same night, the same door number. A younger man this time, maybe mid-20s, lean, hoodie up, head down, moving with the nervous energy of someone who isn't supposed to be there. He knocked once, waited, went inside. He never appeared on camera leaving. "Housekeeping found the body at 10 the next morning," the trooper said flatly. "No one saw anyone leave, no vehicles documented. The older guy never showed back up on tape. The younger one did. Once in, never out." They ran the younger man's silhouette against their databases. Nothing. No match in facial recognition. No match on fingerprints from the room. The only solid link they had was the handwriting in the margin of the newspaper and the glossy surface of the motel remote. The Louisiana prints and the unknown motel prints from Palm Grove matched perfectly. Whoever he was, he'd been in room 9 the night Weller recorded his final tape, and he'd been in Louisiana the night before Weller chose the canal. Not a ghost, not a myth, a shadow with fingerprints and sloppy, too careful block letters. The profiler tried to cram him into a category. Copycat, he said at first. He sees the media frenzy, the cold case headlines, the myth around this guy, and he latches onto it. Imitates the MO. Uses the same kind of motel, same kind of victim. Leaves a message to make sure we know it's connected. Corbett shook her head. Copycats usually show up after, she said. He was there before the suicide, in the room, handling the recorder, signing the register, helping him. Protégé, the profiler corrected himself, the word sour on his tongue. Disciple. Somebody he met along the way, young enough to be impressionable, old enough to be useful. They moved together for a while. The old one handles the past. The new one handles the future. In the lab, the audio techs went back to the motel tape with new ears. They peeled through frequencies, isolating background noise, searching for something. A second breath, a floorboard creak, a muffled voice. They found it 26 minutes in. Not a word, not a sentence, just the faintest rustle of fabric and a single, almost involuntary sound from somewhere just off mic. A chuckle. Not old, not raspy, young, short, like someone couldn't help laughing at a private joke. You'll find what's left of me before sunrise, Weller said on the tape, voice steady. You'll get your ending. Call it solved, call it closure, call it whatever makes it easier to sleep. Then that tiny, almost swallowed sound, like a younger throat trying to hold back. The techs enhanced it, filtered it, looped it. 2 people in that room, only 1 dead in the canal. They went back further, all the way to Mississippi, to the trailer stripped of clippings and photos. Corbett had the evidence inventory re-examined. Quick items, power tools, food wrappers, a second toothbrush, 2 sets of coffee mugs, a pair of boots 2 sizes smaller than his. At the time, it had been written off as leftover junk from a previous tenant. Now it felt like a presence that had been hiding in plain sight. The storage unit in Palm Grove told the same story. The army green duffel bag had clothes in 2 sizes. The mechanic uniform had 1 name on the patch, Henry Welsh, but the laundry tag inside bore another set of initials. The partial print on the Polaroid with Carla's necklace was not his. A ghost had been hovering at the edges of the evidence for years, leaving smudges nobody bothered to see. The task force tore through old witness statements with fresh eyes. A clerk in Mississippi remembered a kid hanging back while Gary Willis paid for supplies. A waitress in Alabama recalled Greg Wallace coming in with some little cousin who barely spoke and stared at the door instead of the menu. A neighbor in Larkin's Bend mentioned a quiet teenager mowing the suspect's lawn for cash, always wearing headphones, never looking up. No one had thought to write down a name. Nobody thought the silent kid next to the polite man mattered. Now, the map wasn't just red string tracing one man's footprints through time. There was a second line, thinner, weaving beside the first. Habit, proximity, apprenticeship. Palm Grove's headline had said cold case solved. The letters in Louisiana said something else. This doesn't end here. The media loved the twist. Of course they did. It was another act in a story they'd already squeezed dry. Talk shows ran segments on dark mentorships. Documentaries updated their scripts. Podcast hosts recorded breathless specials about the heir to the neighbor killer. The story stopped being about one man and became about an idea, evil as something that spreads, mutates, adapts. In town, the fear shifted flavor. It wasn't about a single old man in a garage anymore. It was about anyone quiet, anyone who watched from the edges, anyone who might have learned the wrong lessons from the wrong person. At the high school, teachers reported students whispering about copycats in the hallways, making jokes about internships with serial killers. The jokes weren't funny. Neither were the new anonymous social media accounts posting photos of the canal with captions like legacy and who's next. The sheriff wanted to push the case closed narrative hard to steady the town. Corbett fought him in closed-door meetings. We can't pretend this is over, she said. We have a second actor. We have an unsolved homicide in another state with the same message. We have an unknown set of prints. If we tell people it's done and he kills again, we're handing him the stage. We also have a community on the edge, the sheriff snapped back. They finally think they got their monster. You want me to tell them there's another one wandering around with his playbook? I want you to tell them the truth, she said. In the end, they compromised. A carefully worded statement. Ongoing investigation. No direct confirmation of a second suspect, but a hint. Just enough to keep eyes open, not enough to cause panic. It didn't matter. He already knew they'd seen him, somewhere miles away, in a town that wasn't on any map they cared about. A young man sat on the floor of a cramped room with peeling wallpaper, a TV on mute in front of him. The screen showed Corbett at the podium, lips moving, words he couldn't hear. He didn't need to. He recognized the look in her eyes, not victory, not relief. Recognition. He held a driver's license between his fingers, flipping it over and over, watching the hologram catch the light. The name on it wasn't his. It never had been. It was one of the old ones, resurrected and polished. Greg Wallace. The photo showed a younger version of Weller, hard-jawed, unsmiling. He pressed his thumb over the image, covering the eyes. "They're not done with you," he said softly, to no one. "They never will be." On the bed beside him, a notebook lay open. Not names this time, not a shopping list like the one hidden in the attic of Palm Grove. Just phrases written and rewritten. Lines he'd heard his whole life. "No one ever saw me. I lived more lives than I can count. It all catches up." He circled the last sentence until the paper almost tore. He didn't remember when he'd started repeating the man's words as if they were his own. Somewhere between the first time he'd seen him clean a wrench with surgical care and the first time he'd watched a news segment on a cold case without anyone realizing the suspect was 4 feet away on the couch. He hadn't needed to be taught how to disappear. He'd learned it by watching. How to stand in corners. How to blend into background noise. How to be the kid no one wrote down. What he still didn't understand was why the old man chose the canal instead of the highway. Why he chose a tape instead of a weapon. Why he left the wrench when he could have taken it with him, like a talisman. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was control. Maybe it was just age finally weighing more than fear. All he knew was this: the story people were telling now was wrong. They'd turned him into a finished sentence, period at the end. A warning, a lesson, a cautionary tale tied up in a 30-minute special. They didn't see the pieces that didn't fit, the edges still sharp and exposed. They didn't see him. He closed the notebook, slid the fake license into the pocket of his jeans, and picked up a cheap ball cap from the nightstand. On the TV, the chyron still read Florida 1987 cold case solved. Underneath, in smaller letters, a host asked if there could be a copycat on the loose. He turned off the TV. Copycat. Disciple. Protege. They were all wrong words. Words that made him sound like a lesser version of something bigger, like an echo instead of a voice. He wasn't copying. He was continuing. Back in Florida, Corbett stood alone at the canal again, the heat sinking into her bones. The memorial flowers bobbed in the water, neon plastic against murky brown. The mural of Carla watched over it all, painted eyes reflecting something the living had missed. On her phone, new alerts kept stacked up. A woman found near a highway rest stop in Texas. Another motel death in Georgia, with the same blunt force trauma, the same careful staging, the same lack of struggle. No notes this time. No circled headlines. Just absence and precision. The local cops in those states hadn't linked them yet. Different jurisdictions, different rhythms. But she saw it immediately. The distances, the dates, the method. A route. She traced it with her finger on the map pinned in her office later. Louisiana to Texas to Georgia. A rough triangle around Florida. Like someone was drawing a boundary around the place where it all began. The profiler stood in the doorway watching her. "If this is him," he said quietly, "he's faster than the old man ever was. Bolder. He's not burying them. He's leaving them where we'll find them." "Because he wants us to," Corbett answered. "Because he thinks the story belongs to him now." "Does it?" She looked at the web of red lines, the faces, the headlines, the taped-out quotes in plastic sleeves. "It belongs to whoever finishes it," she said. Outside, Palm Grove tried to be a town again. Kids rode their bikes past the house that used to be his, now empty, blinds drawn, for sale sign creaking in the breeze. Old men played cards in the diner where Carla once worked the late shift. Teenagers filmed TikToks on the bridge without looking down at the water, pretending they weren't standing on the edge of a wound. Some nights people still swore they heard something by the canal. Not voices, not ghosts, Just a rhythm that didn't belong to frogs or insects. A soft splash, a metallic clink, the echo of a tool hitting stone and being lifted away. The official report said the cold case was solved. The headline said the nightmare was over. But in evidence rooms and dim motel chambers and on back roads lined with broken motels and busted gas stations, one truth kept pulsing under the noise. The neighbor's secret double life hadn't ended in the water. It had multiplied. The Texas scene broke 2 days before sunrise. A truck stop off I-10, 20 miles outside Beaumont. Parking lot slick with rain, neon buzzing from a diner that never closed. The attendant found her first, slumped in the driver's seat of a white sedan, door half open, purse on the floor, headlights still burning through the downpour. No one heard the single dull crack that split her skull open. Same pattern, same silence, same invisible exit. Corbett got the call at 4:12 a.m. The words "similar to Louisiana" were enough to drag her out of bed before the sentence finished. She drove through the pre-dawn dark, caffeine and adrenaline doing the work of sleep. Another woman, another state, another message in absence. She knew before she saw the file that it would match. The handwriting on the gas station receipt in the victim's pocket did the rest. 4 printed words in neat block letters. "We're not done yet. We're plural confirmation." The sheriff's office in Texas tried to treat her like an outsider, like Florida's nightmare didn't belong to them. She stood in their conference room, rainwater still drying on her jacket, and laid the photos out in a row. Louisiana, now Texas. 2 victims in 2 weeks, each left visible, staged for discovery. Each linked by handwriting and method. "He's building momentum," she said. "Every state he crosses, he gets bolder. He doesn't hide the bodies anymore. He's not burying, he's performing." The Texas captain scoffed. "Performing what? Copying headlines?" Corbett met his stare. "Writing them." She left the photos on his desk and walked out. By noon, the FBI had issued an interstate task force directive. The Bureau called it Operation Heatline. The media called it the Mechanic's Heir. The nickname spread faster than evidence. News anchors ran montages of Weller's mugshot fading into an AI-aged portrait of a young man with a hooded sweatshirt. They called it chilling. They called it legacy. They called it entertainment. The profiler hated the noise. "He's feeding on it," he said. "He's watching every segment. The more we broadcast, the louder he gets." Corbett disagreed. "We starve him, he goes underground. We keep the lights on, he can't hide." So they flooded the airwaves, billboards, alerts, a hotline that rang off the hook within hours. But most calls were static. Conspiracy hunters, teenagers faking leads for attention, lonely people wanting to talk about monsters because it made theirs smaller. Only one call mattered. A trucker named Alvin Rowe, 46, claimed he'd given a ride to a hitchhiker matching the Louisiana motel description. "Quiet kid," he said. "Didn't talk much. Asked about the weather up north if the storms hit Georgia yet. Said he was heading there." Corbett asked what the kid looked like. "Thin, pale, brown hair, carried one of them old army duffel bags, smelled like oil." "How old?" "20s maybe, but his eyes, not young, like he'd seen too much." She thanked him and hung up. On her map, she drew a red line east, following the same route Weller had taken decades earlier. Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, always circling back toward Florida like a planet stuck in its orbit. She didn't tell anyone, but she'd stopped thinking of the new suspect as unknown. In her head, he had a name, the one she couldn't prove yet.